Hello there and welcome back to Valdis Story. Today we're going to be coerced into doing several tasks for the Elder here. Reina just can't say no. So first of all, let's go visit that tram station. This is something that will be useful to us. With the tram repaired, we'll be able to travel between the cities we've been to much more quickly. No going through the dangerous routes and having to deal with all those enemies again, unless we want to. This here is Claudia, the tram engineer, and one of the more useful NPCs in the game, because in addition to repairing the tram, she is also a merchant and offers quite a few useful items, as we'll see once we finish with this conversation. Yeah, I expect most of these videos to open up with and or end with a lot of dialogue. That's just the way the game goes. Importantly, it seems one of our crew members seems to have been spotted in the area, and protected some of the nearby villages from demons. So we'll want to check in on him. So I mentioned that Claudia's inventory is especially useful. That is because she not only has the ability to compact lesser fellow spirits into greater ones, which can be useful if you need those to get a certain item, but she also offers a few spell lanterns, which are a fairly important material if you're playing a magic-based character. We're not, but we'll still get some use out of them. And he is the man of the hour, not doing terribly well. Probably not the best thing to be occurring since he is one of the playable characters after all. We better save him, make sure we can actually play as him later. By the way, this doesn't actually have any relation to playing as him. The only thing you need to do in order to do that is to beat the game once as Wyatt or Reina. I'm just making fun here. So, in order to cure Vladin, we're going to have to find a rare cure-all flower. The Lourdes tier. So, with our friend's life on the line, we're going to have to save him. We need to go collect that Lourdes tier immediately. But only after we do some shopping, of course. Gotta keep our priorities straight. So this here is one of a few armor merchants in the game. They don't sell armor, but they will upgrade armor that you have acquired. Vega here will work on angelic armor and only angelic armor, and we could upgrade our paladin armor if we were so inclined. Which we're not, because we're not actually going to be using it all that much, if at all really. So that would just end up being a waste of materials that we would have to then farm for later. Now this merchant here is perhaps the most important one in the game, period, because he sells one of the very few Master Scrolls that you can acquire. Yep, this is the first available extra skill cancel. And unfortunately it requires one of each of a type of rare material. So it'll be some time before we can actually acquire that. We will, however, pick up a Book of the Old Gods while we're at it. We don't have much use for it, but maybe Vladin will, when he recovers. The third item he had, the first one in the list, that discarded doll. Pro tip, don't buy it. You'll regret it. We'll go into why later, just trust me for now. Durga over here on the opposite side of town of Rega is his counterpart armorsmith. He works on demon armor, which we don't have any of at the moment. We could have actually acquired one in the first area, one of the items I elected to not go back and acquire once I picked up that first Master Scroll, because it honestly wouldn't be too useful for our character. This down here leads into the old sewers, which are currently blocked off. We'll have to put a bookmark in that for later. And that's pretty much the entirety of Rock. So we might as well get going and try and save our friend's life, since you know he's on death's door and all. So, I mentioned that the area we would be doing today last time would end up being perhaps even more annoying than the frozen hellhole that we had just done. And that is because, much like that frozen hellhole, we'll end up having to deal with a status effect throughout the area. Not freezing this time, no, but poison. So if you have the materials, get the poison elixir. If you don't have the materials, farm them up. They're common enough, just kill enemies around the town, well, outside of the town, and get one, because poison in this game is very nasty. Someone in one of the threads actually mentioned that they got stalled at this upcoming area as a result of that, of having not acquired one of those poison elixirs, so take heed. Fortunately, we're not immediately dropped into poison hell. We have a bit more reasonable of an area beforehand. This is actually probably the best place to grind up those common materials I mentioned, since they'll probably drop from these guys fairly quickly. The upcoming enemies are all things that we fought before, but these particular feminine ice ferals, the ones without the arms, keep an eye out for them. We've had no trouble dealing with them up to this point, but they can actually be one of the more annoying semi-common enemies that we're going to be coming across. I think I just twisted my tongue into several knots there trying to say that. Taking the upper path along this skyway here leads to an optional item, and it is absolutely worth doing this now, depending on what kind of build you have. You have to rely on both the ice pillars and the air boosting spells, which I failed to do properly there. Let's try that again. Fortunately, falling here does not drop you into a pit of damaging spikes or annoying status effects or anything like that. Why am I specifically saying that it doesn't do that? Because, oh, we'll be seeing that later in the game. Just one of the many ways that this game really does not combine the platforming with the exploration all that well. But, I really shouldn't be complaining prematurely, I should save it for then. The item we can pick up here by doing this, optionally, is the Magister vestments. We will not be wearing them, but if you're playing a magic-focused build, especially one that is also investing in luck, it's very worth equipping. Moving on, we have another one of these sealed rooms where we have to deal with the green glowing enemies before we can move on. It's these weird bunny things that we fought once before. Not too threatening, but if you let them get the drop on you, they can be somewhat tricky. Fortunately, it is very easy to anticipate their movements by making use of status effects, as we're actually doing here. That little skull angel symbol appearing above their head is signifying that we've procced the Reckoning status effect on them. How status effects work in this game is pretty much that every damager type aside from the basic physical damage type has the potential to cause a specific status effect. Fire can cause burning, ice can cause freezing, and so on and so forth. Divine magic, which we've been making use of quite a bit with the God Hand buff, causes the Reckoning status debuff. And this causes enemies to take more damage from any divine attacks, specifically 240% more, so it's not an insignificant debuff. And the main point that I started this whole little diatribe for is that any status effect will always show you the location of an enemy even if they turn invisible or dig underground or what have you. Status effects are really good is what I'm saying. So here we finally arrived at our main area for today's video, the Abandoned Gardens, and we're going to go in with a full suite of ice spells just to try them out since we haven't been using them too much aside from the ice pillar of course. I was specifically hoping to take advantage of freezing any enemies that we come across, which doesn't ever occur, for a reason I think I understand. There's a lot of difficulty in understanding the nitty-gritty mechanics in this game since very little of it is actually documented, despite there being a manual available on the Steam page. Here we ended up leveling early on into the area, which is quite unfortunate. It's nice if those occur midway or late into an area since they give you a full HP and MP restoration. However, it did let us pick up the parry skill quite early, and that is a very useful skill indeed. Now, if you time your block to occur just before being struck by an enemy, assuming it's an attack that you are capable of blocking, rather than just blocking, you'll additionally respond with a special counter move. This is very useful for keeping the momentum of a fight going, whereas normal blocking just kind of has you standing stock still in place. Oh, I should say, no fish were harmed in the recording of this Let's Play. It's all smoke and mirrors. It's actually worth killing any fish that happen to drop down from the streams of water pouring from the sky, because they can actually have the chance of dropping items. Nothing too amazing, but hey, next item is worth the few seconds of extra effort it takes to kill them. Just waiting for that poison trap mine that one demon lady set on the ground to expire. They only last for so long, and honestly, better safe than sorry. We want to avoid being struck with poison for as long as possible. I mentioned before that it's quite nasty, and don't worry, I don't manage to avoid it completely. We'll get to see just how awful it is soon enough. And yeah, for some reason I'm really bad at avoiding those big demons' grabs today. I think I just expect them to die more quickly than they actually do. I guess I'm used to characters with more DPS output than I currently have. That's one of the troubles of playing a game like this where your character progresses as you go along. If you start a new character, you're going to be suddenly a lot weaker than you just used to be, and it takes time to adjust. That's my excuse at least. Another skull door, although this one just leads back to a room that we were already in. Now this enemy type here, this is another one to keep your eye out for. We utterly destroy her there, but these demon sorceresses, I think they're called, you can tell I really don't give a shit about the lore or enemy naming in this game because I have no idea what anything other than the bosses are called. This enemy type here can be really difficult to deal with if you don't just take them out perfectly and immediately, as we'll be seeing later. But that one did go quite well, and it does show just how quickly you can carve through enemies if you know what you're doing, or just get lucky. Anyway, the main thrust of this room is this armor set here, the Warlock Vestments, and despite the fact that we're not an especially magic-focused build, we're actually going to be equipping it here, because notably it gives a plus 5% base affliction chance. So affliction is one of your core stats, and it governs the chances you have of causing status effects towards enemies. With a base affliction chance of 0, you have 0% chance to inflict status effect with most things. Some things seem to have the ability to inflict status effects regardless, which is why we've been able to make use of Reckoning, but it was why we weren't able to freeze enemies up to this point. And even at this point it's still fairly unlikely because it's only a 5% chance. But it's a possibility now. And yeah, we were just struck with poison there, and did you pay attention to exactly what it was doing? If you looked at the floating numbers that were popping up in front of Reina, you may have noticed that it was doing 4 damage per tick, each tick being slightly faster than a second, I think. But if you actually paid attention to our bars in the upper left, I meant to do that by the way, you may have noticed that we were not just taking HP damage, but MP damage as well. That is why poison is so ridiculously unfairly nasty in this game. It hurts your health and your mana by a significant degree. So not only are you constantly dying, but you're also losing your resource that allows you to save yourself from dying via healing spells. It's kinda bullshit, yes. And it's a case of where the enemy's version of that status effect is just straight up superior to yours. Because while poison is a pretty significant damage dealer against enemies, as far as I can tell, I don't think they actually have an effective mana meter, so you're not doing MP damage to them. Or if you are, it never really comes into play. I've never noticed an enemy having an inability to attack after I've struck them with poison, for example. Now right here was a good example of why these sorceress enemies can be so tricky to deal with. They love to summon those demon raven things who just constantly mob on you and prevent you from actually attacking by just stun-locking you. It can get really bad in some situations, especially if you're fighting other enemies in tandem. Okay, so continuing to talk about things that I fail to cover when they're actually occurring, I am way too wordy at times. We picked up a skeleton key, as you may have noticed, so we can now open those skeleton doors. Useful for shortcutting your way through this area, and it allows us to get a few items in earlier areas, those doors we've spotted before. We'll go back for them at some point, probably later rather than sooner. It's usually best to wait until you have a few environmental upgrades. So here we're just gonna let the poison run out, cause it's gonna kill us. Yeah, good thing we got those life potions. If it weren't for those, that would have been a game over right there. poison is fucking nasty in this game. It just continues to amaze me just how rude of a status effect it is. So making use of ice pillars and air boosting here, we can reach this treasure chest. Normally it would require either smart dropping from above or a later on double jump. This gladiator vest is a pretty good armor set, enough so that we're actually going to be equipping it here, mainly to show off its additional bonus effect. So armor sets thus far have provided core stat bonuses, maybe some special modifiers, and maybe an extra bonus during focus mode. But this is the first armor piece that we've come across that provides a unique bonus that has specific triggers. In this case, automatically activating focus mode regardless of how much your focus bar is filled when you drop dead, and that's signified by that ready phrase in the upper portion of the screen. There's a time limit in between activations, that's why it has that notation. It's one of a few armor sets that actually provides bonuses unique enough that you could theoretically build a playstyle around them. In this case, even more quick activation of focus mode because you have not only your regular one, but the additional one whenever you reach critical HP. I've not actually played around with this too much, so I don't actually know if that kind of build would be all that effective. But you do tend to be pretty powerful in focus mode, so I imagine it could be at least decent. It's one of the fun things about this game is there's a lot of different ways you can build your characters, and even if they're not optimal or the most effective, they can still be pretty damn good. And right there I actually show off, I think for the first time, the parry ability. I'll be honest, I'm not too used to using it because the character I played as right before doing this LP did not even have the ability to parry. So I'm kind of out of practice with regards to that. So at this point we've changed up our spell loader a little bit, no longer fully ice-attuned. God Hand, for now at least, is a better weapon buff because of that extra damage potential from causing Reckoning. We also have the Aegis spell re-equipped because it is perhaps the most useful spell in this area if you're Reina. I say if you're Reina because she's the only one with this spell. That's the one that clears status effects and has a reduced MP cost if you're afflicted with a status effect when using it. So, of course, I completely forget that I have it equipped and never actually use it, even when I get struck with poison. Yeah, I'm not always the most attentive player, even with games that I've played tons of hours in. There's always one or two things I forget about that would have been useful to use. So this encounter here was something I was hoping to just kind of completely avoid and, maybe do later after we've taken down the boss, who is close by. But due to a platforming gaffe, I had no choice but to deal with it. It's kind of difficult getting out of there, getting mobbed by the sorceress, her ravens, and the other enemies that are down there. Thankfully, things went okay. Saved myself from dying thanks to activating that focus mode. So here we have our obligatory pre-boss, difficult mini-boss encounter. 2 sorceresses and a few demon poison dudes. That's the official name, Demon Poison Dude. Don't go look up the lore guide and correct me. So this can be rather nasty because, as I mentioned before, with those ravens constantly hounding you, they do a very good job at stun locking you. But this does show off the emergency activation of the gladiator vest, which I don't make the best use of, but it does allow me to finish the fight a bit quicker with that focus finisher use. And despite the fact that things didn't go too smoothly, I am happy with that outcome because I got one of the best possible rare drops from this scenario, that Devil's Onyx. That is one of those 3 high-tier gems that is required to purchase that Master's Scroll from the Junk Collector. If you don't actually pick one up from any of the sorceresses in this area, I would actually recommend going in and out of a room that they're in to farm them for it, so that way you have it if you end up acquiring the other 2 gems. That's enough about that because we have the boss. Not a very pleasant fellow, that's for sure. So, Shu-Gough is similar to Lockjaw in a way, in that it's kind of more of a platforming boss than a proper one-on-one duel boss. And that is something I like about the bosses in this game in general. It doesn't do the Dark Souls sort of thing of just having you constantly fight against humanoid opponents. It actually makes use of the fact that it is a 2D side-scroller with a lot of platforming, and actually makes that a part, if not a main focus, of its fights. I'm not criticizing Dark Souls for not doing this, by the way. I'm criticizing 2D platforming games that, say, take a bit too much influence from Dark Souls and just end up having that dual boss, which doesn't exactly work in 2D space as well as it does 3D. But yeah, this is more of a platforming fight than anything because Shu-Gough doesn't really ever attack you directly for the most part. Instead, he just causes a variety of nasty projectiles to spawn that you have to avoid while following him around, which is a lot easier once you realize he has a very set pattern that he sticks to like glue. He will always move between the center platform, lower right, upper right, lower left, and then back to the center to armor up and start regenerating his HP. The best thing about this is that if you know where he's going to go, you can go there in advance of him and start attacking him immediately, preventing him from attacking completely. This is especially true if you actually have the ability to freeze him reliably, which we don't here thanks to our base 0 affliction chance. At least I'm pretty sure that's why that's not occurring, despite us using the ice buff. But yeah, if you can reliably head him off and just constantly stun lock and freeze lock him, you can prevent him from doing literally anything and just kind of completely own him. If you fail to do that, however, that's when you have to deal with him spawning just hordes and hordes of projectiles like he's a bullet hell boss or something. And that's when things get tricky and you start having to dodge and weave in between the projectiles while avoiding dropping down below into the poisonous mist, which yes, it will damage you and cause poison, although I don't think it detracts from your combat score. But still, we did pretty good, even got that nice S rank. I'm so upset I didn't manage to make it a streak up to this point, but it is what it is. For getting the overall S rank, we got an additional stat point, which is quite nice. And as for this skill point that we got from leveling up, I'm actually not entirely sure why I wanted to use it. I ended up going with the third of the base level of monk tree skills. It's just pretty much everything in the monk tree is good, especially if you're going primarily with agility, that it really doesn't matter what you end up picking after you unlock the kick god break. Anyway, cutting out the travel time back to town, cause I'm nice like that, let's deliver the Lotus Tear to Vladin. Gotta make sure he doesn't die after all. So, now that we've saved Vladin's life, it's time to go do more tasks for Elder Brazier. Yeah, I mentioned we would be doing a few of those in this video, and we've only done one thus far, the tram station stuff. Reina is just too helpful for her own good. It's actually interesting comparing these dialogue sequences between the different characters. They all end up doing it, but Brazier basically ends up having to talk them into it, whereas Reina here just kind of immediately accepts. So now we can get into that one locked door that it said it required the library key, so let's go do just that. Cutting out the intermediary travel time, of course, since nothing especially exciting happened. So this right here is a real jerk of an encounter. I mentioned that these big shield boys can be one of the more annoying enemies to deal with if you encounter them with groups of other enemies, and this is a very good example of that. We can only damage them from behind, but we also have to deal with their rather rapid HP regeneration, and our attempts to actually get behind and attack them being interrupted by the angels. Thankfully, we were able to put the hurt on them quickly enough for it to not be too big of a deal, and Vladin, I know you're basically complimenting us here, but your help really could have come in handy there, I'm just saying. So, despite my constant griping about Reina's inability to say no to others' requests, this one turns out to be quite useful for us. This library here is going to act as something of a hub along with the various cities that we'll be finding. But rather than being filled with useful NPCs from the start, it'll slowly fill up as we rescue more and more of the lost crew, which is pretty cool. I always enjoy base building mechanics in video games that don't have them as the focus, and even though this is a very bare bones version of that, it's still pretty neat to me. So we'll need to meet with Claudia again later. But for now, let's hand over that Book of the Old Gods over to Vladin. He's capable of reading it. So these books are basically collectibles that you can acquire over the course of the game. There are 4 total, and each one has unique lore. It ends up filling you in on the backstory of the game and its world, and it's not actually all that interesting because it has next to no connection to the game itself. This is a real crime I notice a lot of games committing, video game crimes, wherein they end up having lore backstory for the game, but it doesn't really connect in any meaningful way to the game that you're actually playing. So unless you're purely interested in reading someone else's made-up mythology, it doesn't really do anything for you. However, these books are still absolutely worth collecting and turning in because doing so will give you either a stat point or a skill point. And though I realize this isn't the most exciting thing to end upon, that's enough for now.